Okay. Welcome to the Fabled Academy. We are here still at Calling Utrecht, and we have a very special guest here who brought Levia to the table. So tell us, what's your name? Where do you come from?
Hi, I'm Michel, and I come from the Netherlands, so it was very close by. And yeah, I brought Levia, and it was a big surprise for most of my opponents, but it was a lot of fun. The way the deck works is essentially like a very nice mid-range plan. You block a bit, you attack a bit, and you try to whittle down your opponent long enough until you manage to make the right pitch stacks to come in for a huge, big barraging beatdown turn. And in the beginning of the game, you kind of go in with a huge pummel play plus a CNC or an erase phase to kind of cripple your opponent. So yeah, in terms of equipment, we almost always run Romping Club because it's just 4 attack, cost 2, super efficient. Most of the pitch is actually morely blue, then more red, and then a little bit of yellow. Because the way this deck actually wants to run is using Piano Spring Tunic and efficiently using that every 3 turns in order to have the setup of pummel plus a blue pitch into a 6 attack that costs 2 for most part. But this is mostly inspired actually by Mansand's list that he ran for Levia, for Club Levia. But that was before Uprising came out. So I took some of his advice for like cards that he was considering running, and that's mostly like the changes are made actually in the sideboard, so that's for later. But yeah, when it comes to the main equipment, these 4 are the ones I've always run. Depending on the matchup, you bring in the extra ones. You'd have this against all the Viscerais. I was considering running Arcane Barrier 2 to stop Rosetta Thorn. Downside was you would often spend too much time using up all your hand to block everything out, and then you don't have a turn on your own. But especially the Viscerai matchup is already tough enough, so you really just have to get lucky with rolling a Scabskins, sometimes taking 8 damage a turn and coming in for maybe like 15 or so if you get really lucky. The problem is then, of course, in that matchup you are running Scabskins without Gambler's Gloves. The Gambler Gloves in there is only actually against Prism, which you then run with Mandible Claws. The whole point is you actually just keep rolling the dice, try to get rid of every single aura that they have, and in doing so, they you kind of fatigue them in that sense, because just trying to stop their phantasms with your attacks is already good enough, but just raw attacking them to the face is just not enough because they can have enough time to climb back into the game. And then you don't want to be on the pummel turn on the Romping Club plan, because that is not enough to clear every single aura out. So that is often the way to go. And then the Skullhorn No Room Gloves, that is against Icelander Kano. I did go up against an Icelander, and it was because of the Skullhorn that I was able to actually Arcane Barrier 3 and completely fatigue them, which was quite insane. So that definitely helped, especially, of course, if you're running a lot of blues. This is, in my opinion, the right way to go. The discard effect not relevant ever, because, of course, you're not playing Rhinar, and you have a hand that you don't actually want to randomly mess around with. So I'd rather just stick with that. There are clutch cases where that can come into effect, but I'd rather just keep it for the Arcane Barrier 2. Other than that, for the main stuff, Goliath Gauntlet's very handy. If you don't manage to get that 3rd turn pummel setup ready with Fiendel, you are left with Goliath Gauntlet helping you push CNC to 8, Swing Big to 10, Erase Face to 8 as well, and that is just enough for especially all the aggro decks like Phi, Viscerai, Briar to have to think twice about how early they want to block with their equipment. And especially if you actually have the pummel on top of that, this can be like the early bait for them to think, oh, you don't have pummel. I can safely block with two blocks for 6 in total, plus like let's say Grasp the Arc Knight for 2 for 8, and then you come in with a pummel on top, and then they basically lose a turn, and you get all the pressure for the next turn. Crown is a new fun piece from Uprising. In my opinion, better than Skullcap. It always blocks for 2, which is a very fine thing to have. Skullcap can sometimes be a bit wonky, especially if you're trying to deal with managing life totals, which is already stress enough. Especially my deck runs 3 Sigil Solace, so maintaining that life point is just too much of a hassle in my opinion. And the Arcane Barrier 3 is irrelevant if you already have it nicely in Gloves and Skullhorn. What this card really shines with, if you really need that extra 5th card to have a 5-card hand, this helps you out. If your opponent comes in with C and C, you can just say, sure, I'll take 4, I'm gonna get that card back, I didn't need my arsenal anyways. This can help you out. But another thing which I found really, really clutch with this card, I run, especially for defense reactions, 3 Fate Foreseen, 3 Sink Below. And with this on top, this is just another way for me to actually pitch stack barraging beatdowns together in order to come in the second cycle and then just go triple beatdown, pitch into club for often like 10 plus damage, which is enough to just finish the game outright when they're at about 10 or below. So yes, this card already just feels a lot better than Skullcap.
Okay. Yeah, before we jump into your main deck, tell us like how far did you get with Levia?
Oh, Levia. Well, the entire tournament was in the end like 12 rounds. So I ended up going 7-5, but of course that does include, of course, the draft part. When it came to just the CC, the first day was 4 rounds, of which I won 3, lost 1. And today there's only 2 rounds of CC, of which they were both Viscerized, but I beat 1 and lost the other.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in seeing now your main deck, man. Show us.
Sure. So the main deck, just like what Mansand's list was, it's actually fairly similar, almost maybe card for card the same. The whole point is you want to actually just have these red attacks that just are super strong, coming at your opponent essentially. And this is what you want to be pairing up with Pummel, and we even run 9 Pummels. So the reason you run Levia, for instance, beyond Reinar, is actually for this card in particular. It's a 2, so it works with the Pummel, and it comes in for 7. The Blood Depth barely ever matters. The only time it matters is if you already have one in your graveyard and you're unlucky enough to actually banish it, which luckily for me never happened. But I would have lost a bunch of games were it to have happened. But it's very rare. You end up actually with all the cards you have in your graveyard plus the equipment that gets thrown in. You're doing a random shuffle of like 30 cards. You're not really gonna hit this, okay. Which is really nice. And the card, what makes this card feel really nice, it's just the 7 attack that blocks for 3. And just doing that already tells your opponent, okay, I need to block for 6 at the least, and then a little bit more. And then they have to take into account, do I have Pummel or not? And just that is enough to either consider them to like get hit by Pummel, or they overblock for no reason. Like there have been games or turns where I did not have Pummel, acted like I did have it by pitching 3, having 1 left over and a tunic counter, and them going, oh no, I'd rather not get pummeled, block it fully, which is great. That's exactly what I want. I want that extra value, especially in a deck. This is really a super fair deck at the end of the day. Cards that I'd really want to get pummeled are, of course, the on-hits, Command and Conquer, and Erase Face. The problem with Brute is the fact that they are very strong attacks often, but they just don't have any pressure. That's also the main reason I ended up not going for Reinar, because Reinar has the power to intimidate, to get actually damage through, but that damage is in the end irrelevant if your opponent wanted to keep their 4-card hand anyways. So these cards enable my aggro opponents to have to think twice about like, okay, my important combo card, for instance, let's say if this goes against Viscerai and it's hitting a Mortartide or a Revel in Runeblood, just being able to force out 2 cards that would have made their turn really strong, and then coming in with a pummel to get rid of the third one, it really destroys most of the game plans that rely on a very high card hand. Erase Face, I was considering actually sideboarding, but due to how it actually interacts with most opponents, it actually does always something. Certain matches more than most. Against, for instance, like Viscerai, this is a destructive card. Just being able to stop all those rune chants coming in. Beyond that, Briar can no longer fuse. Oldhim can no longer fuse with the Ice Hammer. For certain matchups, it's not as necessarily important because they're just like, oh yeah, sure. I just needed to play certain types of cards, not talent type of cards. So then it wasn't as strong. But I still feel like there's always a moment that you can catch your opponent off guard with this card. Swing Big is Swing Big. It's just big and strong and it hurts a lot. You have to watch out with this card though. You really want to be playing this into an opponent that either can't block this well or actually having the pummel with this card. Because just throwing in 8, sure they can take it, but there are also have been games where I'd rather not play this card, block with it, and attack with a weaker power card, because I would not want them to have that extra Quicken token, which would give something go again, which could then be devastating on my end, trying to block that out. So this is actually quite a more double-edged sword, especially in an aggro format where certain decks really want to go really wide with their turns, and the Quicken token can sometimes really help with that. Pack Hunt is an interesting card. It's usually seen as the weaker of the bunch because it's just basically command and conquer stats, but without the relevant on it. But it is nice to always have this card ready for if you are going for the big barraging beatdown turn. Instead of going with club, you could just push 2 more damage if this is an arsenal and you have the triple barraging in hand. So this can then push for 4 intimidate, and even just with 2, it's the exact number for 3 intimidate, so that your barragings give the power bonus to the card. Because a lot of, if not, I've actually, against all the aggro decks I've seen, 0 defense reactions against me. So that's actually really strong, because normally what shuts this type of a playstyle down is when your opponent does end up arsenaling that defense reaction and then coming in for like, oh, here's my 2 cards, there goes your power. Lastly, Alliance Strike. In certain matchups, I just have to cite it out. It's very card hungry by having to throw away a card to get its effect. But in certain turns where you're able to actually just say, hey, I'm coming in with for 5 go again. Here is my club coming in for another 4. It's nice pressure built on 2 cards they can hardly block.
Yep.
Because blocking for 5, you need to block 6, which then devalues their block. And then you come in for 4, which if they want a full block, they have to block again for 6 for the most part. And that is then again devaluing their block. So that feels like a really nice way. Also, just like with the Crown of Providence, another way to throw a barrage and beatdown back onto the bottom of your deck so you can stack those. So in that sense, it kind of also feels, it has a bit of a combo role in that sense, which is really cool. But also, if you need to, just coming in for 7 is strong enough. So beyond the attacks itself, the rest of the deck revolves around just supporting these cards mainly. So we of course have
the 9 pummels.
The 9 pummels. This is obviously the star of the show, and the funniest thing about this card is when you start off with Levia, most of my opponents expected me to go into a Blood Debt plan, which helps because they have to then consider not doing as much damage to me because they're expecting me to do the damage to myself. So I've had some games off guard where they were like, hey, why aren't you Blood Deading yet? I'm like, no, I'm never gonna. or in the rare chance of the one Blood Death card I do have.
Yeah.
And when they don't know I'm on pummel, that's the scariest thing.
Yeah.
And once they see a pummel, they have to start thinking like, do I have more of them? How many do I have? What are the ratios like? And especially if you're able to bluff pummel every time, they have to keep it into account.
Yeah.
And they then sometimes have to block awkwardly, which of course advantages your game plan, because the more cards you can keep, as simple as it says, the more pressure you can apply with Scapskin coming in just for that one extra attack with the club on top of that.
Yeah.
That one extra card that you can keep against them is enough to turn the tide, essentially. Beyond that, we also have, of course, the playset of Barraging Beatdown. Key Brute card always has been. What is really nice beyond trying to set these cards up early, which you often will do with, for instance, so starting the turn, I'd like to always do, if I have, for instance, the blue or the yellow with the red, I always like to pitch the red first to make sure that I already have two together, which always feels nice. But against the aggro opponents who don't like to block, what I also don't mind doing sometimes is if I just have a singular beatdown ready, I'll just be like, okay, I pitch two for the club with a beatdown on top. They're incentivized to block so that I don't get the extra power, but they often will say, no, I will take the damage. And that starts to add up once they realize that, sure, life is a resource, but you're letting a lot of it go by just not blocking these cards.
Yeah.
So this helps you just get to that 10 or below threshold, which allows you to kind of close out the game. To support the beatdown plan, you need more than just 9. I'm running the 3 Clearing Bellow just as a go again, Intimidate, and it blocks for 3, pitch for 3. Perfect card in that regard. High Roller is exactly the same. I never want to roll Scapskins to try to get this. The hitting a 1 is not worth it. So that is one thing you do have to keep in mind. If you do end up getting it, cute bonus, but not guaranteed. This basically plays as this. And then I also play then the 3 Awakening Bellow. A thing to note, it does say Brute Attack Action. It's not gonna support your club. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But other than that, you can play this with these. If the one card you would pitch for the club is a blue card, then you can pay for the 1, and it's just that extra Intimidate 3 pitch block for 3 that you need in this deck. That's the nice thing about this deck. Beyond pummels, it's mostly just 3 blocks, which is really nice. That's also the scary part about playing Reiner. With Reiner, you often would have like the feeling of wanting to go for pummel, wanting to go for pulverize or pulping or wild ride, which are really strong extenders, especially with the go again. But the fact that they don't block, are red, and are relying on extra RNG to get you there is too much of a hindrance, in my opinion. And then, of course, the classic Wrecker Romp, the 6 that pitches for 3, that blocks for 3. This is, of course, a perfect card. If you don't have your 6 ready, your attack ready of your reds, this is kind of your substitute if you're in this dire situation of needing to throw in a pummel. That's in my opinion, the way to do it. Mm-hmm. The last couple cards to round this out are can be considered flex slots, but I do find them quite integral to the plan as well. Triple Sigil of Solace. The 3 life points can be really nice, especially if you are going up against Viserai and stuff like that. When they think, okay, especially in the late game, when they think, okay, I have enough to push you to death. You only have Arcane Barrier 1. You're dead. And then you come in with this, and then they're surprised that you see another turn. So you can kind of clutch them out like that. But often there are turns where you end up realizing, oh, my opponent is not attacking that strong. I only need to block maybe 1 or just 2, and all I wanted to do was just come in with a club. And then it sucks to like keep a card in hand, draw back to 3 when you could have drawn 4. So this is just a free card that you can throw out of your hand, and it's of course relevant, the 3 life gain. there have been games where not in this tournament, but I would play against a wizard where I would be able to stay above 40 life because of this card. So it's actually quite integral. 2 Bonehead Barriers. This is a great meme card. I love this card dearly. It's actually one of these cards that you would often not want to play because the pitching one for this and then using this could have just been blocked for 6 by 3 and the card you pitched would block for 3. But this helps in a multitude of different ways. First of all, there have been a lot of turns where you are just stuck on not getting the pummel you want, and you have this tunic counter that you're just not doing anything with. And that resource can be spent on this, so then you could possibly just get 6 block off of this. And certain scenarios that are very, very niche can be very, very strong with this card. I've had to play against, for instance, Dorinthia yesterday, who ended up going for a huge dominate turn for 8, with, of course, an extra card ready in case to trigger respite and stuff like that. I just had to roll this. I luckily hit a 6 off of this, and I just blocked with my boots. And there I blocked the entire attack without letting them use their respite effect at all, which was really strong. Against the aggro decks, this is a very nice card to deal with any kind of rune chant, physical damage split you want to deal with, or if you have to go up against a person who wants to go very, very low, like Phi, this then blocks the Phoenix Flame for 1. If they come in with an attack for 3, it blocks that as well. It really helps you smooth out those attacks that would often devalue your blocks for 3. So that's the nice thing about this card. And the last card in my main deck is the one of Reckless Swing. I've won 2 games off of this, which is really strong. It's that one cheeky card that you can often pitch early that your opponent might not be thinking about, and in the late game they think they're at 2, they'll be fine, and then if they don't know about this card, it comes in. But even if they do know about this card, it forces, for instance, the aggro players to be very scared of going to 2, and then they block with just that crucial combo piece they needed for their turn, which then gets stopped by this. The only downside of this card is that it doesn't block as efficiently as you'd want it to, because, I mean, sure, it blocks for 4, but you're throwing away a card. So unlike a Sing Below or something, which only uses itself, but it does pitch for 3, which is always very handy. And you have to always keep in mind to pitch your attacks as often as you can if you want to be going for this type of game plan. If you're up against like a more fair deck that can die to this, you need to make sure to always have some 6s back in your deck. The easiest one is, of course, Wrecker Romp, because it's already a 3 pitch. But sometimes I've had turns where I'm like, okay, I'm pitching for 3 with this thing, and I'm immediately also pitching, a Command and Conquer or anything like that, just to have these things together, which is very nice. But don't feel bad if you can't actually get the 2. Sometimes you just need to block for 4 to stop a very important on hit. But rather you'd not want to do that. You'd actually then use your equipment for that.
Okay.
So that's the main deck. It's 54 cards.
Yes.
So you have to always throw in at least 6 cards for this from the sideboard. For the sideboard, I had to make some tweaks to the list.
So we need to hurry a little bit up because the finals are going on in a minute.
I'll be speed running through this. I'm mostly focusing on throwing in these 6 defense reactions.
Okay.
For most aggro decks, this is often the way to go. Blocks those pesky on hits that go in for 4, like Snatch and whatnot. All that you got is perfect against Rosetta Thorn. They want you to fully block your hand away. This lets you just draw that 1 extra yellow or blue that you need to come back in for Pummel for a Romping Club for 4. So that's very nice about this card. Also, if you need to, if you're up against anyone who does dominate, this can be just that extra card that you needed from your arsenal to just block that extra amount. Mm-hmm. Never bad. And pitched for yellow. Never bad about that. The 3 Fog Downs. is super spicy. It's really destructive against the Viceroy. I realized that most of my Viceroy opponents really could not deal with this card, and often had to resort to just the best they would often be able to do is use their Aura card, which would make a rune chant, come in with a shriveling attack for like 7 and 1 rune chant, and that would be the best they could do. Other than that, maybe they just come in with a Rosetta for 2, and that's basically not a turn. So this card is really strong. Downside is it's a 3-cost card. It's very pricey, and it does not have go again on itself, so you can't do anything when you're playing this card. So you really have to commit to taking some damage, often blocking with the rest of your hand, and saying, okay, this will be my fog down turn. And if you can do this, following it up with, for instance, an erase phase, especially against the Viceroys, that is enough to win that lead, actually, and win that race. Then I also have 3 this round's on me. I actually never fought against a single Fi yet, but this felt like the card to do it. It helps if they're going for the Art of War turns to go from 4 back down to 3. The only downside is I'm not quite sure yet whether drawing that extra card for them is more beneficial to them than having them lose their power. Because just playing it when they're not going to Art of War puts their attacks often from 3 back down to 2, which is then not always efficient for you to block unless you have like a handful of pummels.
Yeah.
And lastly, 2 Oasis Respite against the Wizards and against the Viceroys or any other Runeblade that wants to go super hard with Rosetta because it blocks it fully. You gain the life on top of that because you're often always on the back foot. So that extra life going swing is enough to do it often. The only downside is that it does cost 1, so it's again like one of those cards, just like Bonehead Barrier, that you most likely want to use it when you realize your turns are not working well with Pummel, and you want to be using that Fiendo Spring Tunic to get some value out of it. So that's where that comes in. Often it feels very bad if you want to use this and having to throw away a card of your own.
Okay.
So that's the list.
Man, thank you so much for letting us dive into Levia. Man, that I'm really impressed in you setting up this deck, and you really thought it out. Maybe you have some last words. Do you want to shout out anyone?
I just want to shout out the group of friends that I came here with, and especially everyone from the Dutch scene. Everyone's been super friendly, super wholesome. I find, especially since this is my first calling, I am just really happy that I ended up making it to day 2, and it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for everyone being so welcoming and happy. It really just shows that if you are building up a community, it's enough to have people actually come in and work together, play together, because at the end of the game, that's what it is. It's a game that we all try to enjoy. Yeah. So just have fun and pummel them.
Yeah, man, thank you so much.
Yes.